All right, welcome everyone to the Progress Virginia Spotlight. Today we are with Maya Castillo, the Political Director of New Virginia Majority. Hi Maya, welcome to the PV Spotlight. Can you tell us more about New Virginia Majority and why y'all are so amazing?
Sure, thanks for having me. So New Virginia Majority, we started several years ago, honestly, because we realized that we needed to not just do organizing at a local level, but pass policies that work for working families, for people of color, to make Virginia a more equitable place. Um, I love my job. I'll be honest with you. I get to work with people who have never voted before, returning citizens who have waited years to cast their vote. I get to work with organizers who are working in communities to make sure that people have access to affordable housing and like super basic things that so many people take for granted. Um, I think New Virginia Majority is also super amazing because we don't just organize in one community, but we have a lot of different issue priorities in a lot of different kinds of communities, and they're all, of course, very, very connected. But to take a whole approach like that, to look at the experience of Black Virginians and Latino Virginians and API Virginians and working families within the Commonwealth, and think through how our issues are connected and what we need to make a more equitable and livable place. I think that's really unique.
Yeah, New Virginia Majority is kicking butt on so many levels. It's fantastic. You all have really done a lot to transform the Commonwealth, and I don't say that very lightly. It's true. It's wonderful. So all the feels. So this year, not only did Virginia abolish the death penalty and legalize marijuana, it also passed and enacted the Voting Rights Act of Virginia. Can you tell us why this is so important?
Yes, I'm so excited. This is one of really, and I know we're only in April, but this is absolutely a highlight of 2021. And I can't even get into this without, first of all, thanking so many of the incredible Black and Brown women who were key to getting this thing done. And, specifically Tram Nguyen, our co-executive director, but also Senator Jennifer McClellan, Delegate Marcia Price. They really made this Voting Rights Act. They made it happen. The Voting Rights Act prohibits discrimination in elections administration, requires local election officials to get feedback on voting changes. And, one of the best parts of this is that it creates some state level pre-clearance requirements. These requirements existed actually in the Voting Rights Act, 1965 Voting Rights Act, and it was gutted back in 2013 by the Supreme Court. What it did was require jurisdictions with a history of discrimination to obtain approval before changing voting rules. Virginia obviously was built on the backs of slaves. So many of our laws are based in Jim Crow, in discriminatory practices. Pre-clearance blocks discrimination before it occurs. And passing the Voting Rights Act allows us to ensure that Virginia voters are not suppressed. It steps in now where federal law no longer does. So many voting rights restrictions were designed to disenfranchise people of color and non-English speakers. And the Voting Rights Act of Virginia really is a pretty big step to remedying a voting system that, like I said, was absolutely built on discrimination.
Yeah, reading the clips from, a couple weeks ago when the governor enacted it, well, he sent back the amendments to the General Assembly, and then they voted on them and approved them anyways. But reading those clips, like to where they were calling Virginia a bastion of voting rights, it just made me feel so proud of all the work that New Virginia Majority has been doing and everybody else has been doing, Progress Virginia too, to get to this. So it took years of organizing from grassroots groups like NVM to get to where we are today, a bastion of voting rights. How did New Virginia Majority have the clarity years ago to pinpoint the need to make voting accessible in Virginia?
I mentioned Trem's name a little earlier, in, one of the key people who helped make this happen. She really saw the long game. Expanding access to democracy is really in our DNA, in the DNA of the organization. As the organization expanded from local issues, and this is years ago, right, to state level issues, our founders realized that so many of the changes we needed in our communities had to happen at the state level. We couldn't do it at the local level. And voters were one of the big keys to building those relationships. But, in organizing and talking to people, I mean, what happens if your key constituencies and the communities that you live and work in, what happens if they can't vote, right? So there's a recognition, and this happened, like I said, years ago, that voter education and knocking on doors and calling and texting and showing people how to vote was only one real small piece of the puzzle. We always knew we couldn't just focus on that. We had to make key changes at the state level to expand voting access for all Virginians.
Awesome. In 2016, I worked for a spell at NVM registering voters. I just came back to the country from living abroad. And so I just had to get a job really quickly and was registering voters. And a few of the people that I actually registered were returning citizens. And that at that point in my life, like, I understood how many people were disenfranchised and how difficult it was for people to actually vote. So enacting the Voting Rights Act of Virginia is historic, but there's still a large group of people who are denied their right to vote in the Commonwealth, returning citizens. And those are people that have served time for a felony conviction, and they've paid their debt to society, they've served their terms, but still they're denied their right to vote. Can you tell us more about the efforts to pass a constitutional amendment that would automatically restore the voting rights of returning citizens?
So, there's a process, right? And the process is hard. And it's gotten easier over time. But right now, the governor has to grant returning citizens their right to vote. This is still at the discretion of each governor to maintain, the current processes in place, or to do away with that. Reenfranchisement, ensuring that people have their rights to vote, should not be at the discretion or the whim of any individual of any political party. We do need to see a constitutional amendment happen. So this legislative session, NVM, and a whole lot of other organizations and incredible advocates and people who are returning citizens who've either gained or are waiting to gain their right to vote back, were able to we passed two key bills to ensure that returning citizens are entitled to vote upon their release. The two bills were HJ 555 and SJ 272. This is a first step. Changing the Constitution is hard. Constitutional amendments have to pass both chambers of our General Assembly in two sessions. So this year was year one. Next year can be year two. After the second passage, Virginia voters can then see the amendment on the ballot. So we still have a way to go. But if everything goes well and we make sure we all do our work, right? And make sure that voters turn out at the ballot box, voting rights restoration enshrined in the Constitution is on the horizon. That's really, really exciting.
Yeah, Virginia and three other states are the only states that don't automatically restore voting rights to returning citizens.
Yeah, and I mean, it's crazy. It's a maze, right? Like, I I remember when I first started at New Virginia Majority, someone handed me a grid, and I was like, okay, so this is how this happens, and this is what happens in other states, and this is what happens, and it shouldn't be that hard, right? The point is that if you're eligible to vote, it shouldn't be hard to vote.
I agree 100%. So last November, voters turned out in record numbers, especially in Virginia. And we're seeing a backlash from reactionary politicians in states like Georgia that create barriers to fair and free elections. Why is it necessary that the US Senate approve the For the People Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act? That's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's so amazing. I'll start with the good stuff, right? It's amazing to see voter protections and ballot access expanding in Virginia. I said it just a second ago, sometimes voting is hard and it shouldn't be. The truth of the matter is, despite our progress in Virginia, hundreds of bills have been passed in almost every state in the country, or sorry, have been introduced in every state, almost every state in the country, that create unnecessary barriers to voting. Legislators are trying to limit absentee voting access, cut early voting periods, purge voter lists. All of these changes and these types of restrictions have always disproportionately impacted voters of color. Congress has to step in. They have to pass laws to protect this and strengthen the franchise if we're really actually building a democracy where we can make our voices heard. If we're building a representative democracy, we clearly cannot rely on state level voting changes to make some of this happen.
Yeah, sorry, this is not a question I gave you, but it's just crazy to see that Republicans are trying so hard to suppress the vote instead of actually putting the work and competing to get the vote and maybe trying to appeal to the voter base. It just shows their how racist the party is becoming. Like, they just aren't even trying. Like, they see their only route as being this very undemocratic voter suppression.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, right? This is an attempt. These are attempts to silence people, to make sure that we don't have access, to make sure that we can have our voices heard. And it's really clear that just like we protected ourselves at the state level when the federal level failed to protect us with the 1965, the rollbacks, the 2013 rollbacks of the Voting Rights Act, Congress has to step in and make sure that all qualified voters can make their voices heard.
I hear that. So what's up for New Virginia Majority? What do you guys have cooking next, along with passing the constitutional amendment? What are you guys working on?
Well, it's 2021. So we are planning to ensure that people have access to that ballot box, to make sure that people have access to voting. We will turn out voters in record numbers this year. We always lose so many voters in off-year elections, also intentional, right? That we will do the work to knock on doors and to have conversations to get people turned out to vote. We're still, and we will be digging into redistricting, making sure that our communities are represented in new maps. That's a huge project, and it has tremendous impact. I have 2 daughters, and it makes me nervous to think that they'll be voting on the maps. By the time we redo this again, they will have already been able to vote.
Yeah.
So it's super important. We're also digging into a ton of different issues, like affordable housing, issue priorities that definitely have some, roots in COVID and what's happening right now, but also too have existed before COVID, addressing the inequitable systems that really are embedded into how our world works. So we will continue to disrupt that.
Go for it. I'm here for it. So, Progress Virginia, we're very proud to call New Virginia Majority a partner. We salute you and all the work that we do, and we are here with y'all in the struggle all the way through. So thanks so much for your time, Maya. Is there anything else you want to say?
Just thank you all for your work. Thank you, and all the fantastic information that y'all provide to us, and just looking forward to, like I said, continuing to disrupt all of those systems that oppress working families and women of color specifically. So really appreciate working with you.
Awesome. Thank you. High five. All right. Well, have a good day, and we'll be in touch.